So we have our first speaker, none other than Dr. Aparna Rao. She is a glaucoma consultant at LV Prasad, and she's going to talk on anatomy and physiology of outflow pathway.
So when we talk of MIGS before we even start, it's important for us to refresh and revisit the trabecular meshwork anatomy, because whatever we understand of the trabecular meshwork anatomy is from old studies from Duke Elder or other textbooks what are from enucleated globes. So what is the current update? What is the old anatomy? The old anatomy, traditionally we know that the trabecular meshwork contains three parts, that is namely the one which is closest to the Schlemm's canal, this big lumen here is the Schlemm's canal. The one which is closest to that is your juxtacanalicular tissue. The one which is after that is a corneoscleral tissue. These two they differ in not in terms of morphology but in the intertrabecular spaces. You can see that here the juxtacanalicular tissue is very tightly bound, while the CSM you have wide intratrabecular spaces. And the uveal meshwork is seen as extensions of the CSM as the trabecular meshwork keeps moving towards the ciliary process or close to the iris. So we traditionally know this as parts of the trabecular meshwork in textbooks, what we read. So this is what we get in histopathological specimens. If we get external trabeculectomy, most of the tissue sample will have parts of the sclera and the cornea, and the trabecular meshwork actually will be a very small bit, or in enucleated globes. This is how we see the three layers. But do we understand the trabecular meshwork ultrastructure differently? So the question that arises is, if these are the three parts, all that we know is the juxtacanalicular tissue is a region of most resistance, but what do we understand about the role of then the CSM, and what's the role of the uveal meshwork? This question always pops up as to what those tissues are doing. Why has nature given these three filters kind of a thing in the eye? What is their role? And are these three regions affected differently in different types of glaucoma? Logically, theoretically, yes, they should be affected differently, but we don't know. So when we try to do scanning electron microscopy of trabecular meshwork samples taken out, this is pure trabecular meshwork samples, not the ones which contain the cornea and the sclera. When we do that, this is a patient of steroid-induced glaucoma. Now in steroid-induced glaucoma, we know that there are steroid polymers or glycosaminoglycan deposits which actually block the trabecular meshwork. That's what we know as pathogenesis. But what exactly happens at the trabecular meshwork level? We don't know. So when we do a scanning electron microscopy, we find that there are very bright, if I might say, electron dense deposits deposited all over the juxtacanalicular and the corneoscleral meshwork, but absent in the uveal meshwork. You can see these bright deposits here which actually light up, and these are mostly only on the surface of the trabecular meshwork beams. So if we understand and recall, these electron dense deposits might be the glycosaminoglycans, and we know that the steroid receptors are on the surface. So what do these deposits represent? We still do not know, but what is important for us to understand is that these deposits are widespreadly found only in the JXT and the corneoscleral. So why is it not present in the uveal meshwork is still a question. Similarly, now in controls, how does the trabecular meshwork look like if we take a control sample, only the trabecular meshwork, how does it look like? So if you see here on scanning electron microscopy, in controls, the trabecular meshwork beams are rounded and they are broad. Compare the top panel which are in controls to the below pictures where the trabecular meshwork beams have now become almost thread-like. They become thin and broadened, flattened. They lose their round architecture, and some of them may be thinned out so much that they appear very slender and fiber-like, thread-like, as you can see in pictures. But most importantly, again, what is most important, even if you take it from a moderate to severe POAG, this is a sample from POAG, these are samples from primary open angle glaucoma, both on histology as well as scanning electron microscopy, it is only the parts of your corneoscleral meshwork which are affected more where I'm referring to the thinning of the trabecular meshwork beams. But in the juxtacanalicular region, somewhere the rounding off or the thinning is not so much prominent, which is contrary to what we understand as the juxtacanalicular playing the major role in resistance. So we expect that the majority of the findings should be there in that region. But if you do a scanning electron microscopy, you find most of the changes prominently only in the CSM. So this again tells you that the three regions are affected differently in different types of glaucoma. This was an interesting study wherein now we know that the trabecular meshwork beams pump aqueous into the Schlemm's canal. But if we want to understand how does it do so, all the trabecular meshwork beams, if you liken that to a heart muscle, do all the collagen beams function as a syncytium, contracting together, or some parts contract more than the others? And how does the fluid go in a unidirectional position? Why not when the compression happens, the fluid goes out in other directions? How is that unidirectional flow maintained? So this was a very interesting paper in 2021, which showed that, there are channels or processes that come in between the trabecular meshwork beams, kind of, you can say, projections that come up from the trabecular meshwork beams. Only when there is contraction, that actually now can be seen when the TM is contracting. So possibly these processes, this is the diagrammatic representation. These are compressible chambers and valves, as they call it. Now, presence of these valves ensures the unidirectional flow of aqueous towards the Schlemm's canal. Remember, your Schlemm's canal is 360 degree, so it's really a wonder as to in the superior quadrants or a nasal or a temporal, how does the unidirectional flow is maintained? How is that maintained? Because it has to act against gravity. So presence of these valves is actually possibly helping the unidirectional flow towards the Schlemm's canal, and is an active procedure if we are to believe that these valves exist. But these were in porcine eyes. Now we wanted to see whether it can be present in the scanning electron microscope also, obtained from patients. Now you see a distinct distinction between the two zones here. You can actually see a not so clear but a subtle line of demarcation between your juxtacanalicular and your corneoscleral and the other parts of the meshwork. You can see that here the meshwork is really compact, whereas here the spaces seem to be, this is in low magnification, but just to show that the spaces are more in the corneoscleral meshwork. So we could see the demarcation, but then this is now highlighted here. But what was more important are the presence of these so-called valves or processes were seen both in the juxtacanalicular and the corneoscleral processes. You can see here these are processes that come up in between the beams. We are not sure as to what part of the beams it is coming from, but you can see that some portions you have actually captured that when sectioning that. These are processes that are there in between the trabecular meshwork beams, and it is not present at all the regions. So some of the beams, these processes are present, some of these, they are absent, but they are present more in the juxtacanalicular as opposed to your corneoscleral. So these valves or so-called processes are possibly the reason why how the eye maintains a unidirectional flow of aqueous towards the Schlemm's canal. This is in high magnification of the same. And also when you try to do transmission electron microscopy, we all understand that glaucoma as such is an autoimmune process. There is oxidative stress, inflammatory markers are supposed to be increased. So we wanted to see actually, is that proved in the trabecular meshwork? If we want to see what is the level of stress markers, so we see a lot of autophagosomes and lysosomal vesicles on transmission electron microscopy in different regions. What you see here as crisscross striations in different regions are the collagen bundles, and the orientation differ as to where and how those bundles have been sectioned when you're sectioning the whole sample. But there are a lot of vesicles even in a normal patient. So how these vesicles and what are these vesicles doing in a normal patient versus a glaucoma patient is something that we have to really see. The most important thing about anatomy when we understand, even when we do an MIGS with relevant to that, is what is the flow that happens when we rip off the trabecular meshwork, or when we are incising the trabecular meshwork. What are we doing? Or we are passing a low flow resistance by introducing a stent there. Your overcoming this resistance that is offered by the trabecular meshwork. Traditionally, we understand that there are different veins whereby from the collector channels, after it, the trabecular meshwork pumps it towards the Schlemm's canal. It's collected by the collector channels and then sent into different venous plexus, superficial as well as deep. From there, it goes into the systemic circulation. But what is more important is the aqueous veins. Now, aqueous veins have been described, but I don't think so any of the imaging modalities have actually shown the presence of aqueous veins. We are yet to determine that, because these are big channels that actually, if we are able to image and we are able to do a surgery around where the aqueous veins is, your IOP reduction will be very quick and it will be massive. But we don't know how to image that. But what is more important when we do an MIGS, be it an incisional, be it an excisional, or be it a stent, is that you are now overcoming the resistance that is offered by the trabecular meshwork to aqueous outflow, albeit over a specified quadrant or number of quadrants. But what happens to the collector channels distal to that? We don't know. So most of the IOP spikes or the failure that we see after MIGS is possibly because we understand there is something that is regulating the resistance, and that is directing the flow of aqueous right from the collector channels towards the veins. So if we are taking one part of the resistance out and that becomes a low resistance pathway, obviously these collector channel flow and the flow in the venous plexuses are not going to be the same. Possibly the body will now try to adapt and reduce the blood flow, and that is what is described or presumed, that the collector channels in those regions actually collapse after some time because the resistance has gone. So actually, your MIGS might be doing more harm than benefiting in some patients. Though this is not proven, we don't know. So we always have to remember this, that we try to think that we are doing something good like an MIGS. Yes, we have proven IOP benefits, but in the long run, we have to see what actually happens to the collector channels over long term. Do they close? And what happens to the episcleral venous plexuses? What happens to the flow in that quadrant? Aqueous angiography can actually show you that over long term. And the most important points to ponder is what happens after we do an MIGS. You are cutting, you're excising, you're incising, and when you put a suture under the trabecular meshwork, remember you're gouging under the trabecular meshwork. It's like going under the water in a beach and taking some part of your sand and then the water. Obviously, that area is not going to be the same. It will be filled up. So what is it filled up? It is filled up with fibrotic tissue. So these healing responses that occur after you do an incisional or excisional procedure is equally important to be imaged on ASOCT or UBM and try to correlate it with your clinical findings. We don't know exactly where does this healing response come from. You see hypertrophic scars. You see sometimes the ridge to be closed by a fibrotic tissue, but where is that fibrotic tissue coming from? Is it from the scleral fibroblast? Is it coming from somewhere else? We don't know. Further, stents and MIGS, like I said, what are the causes of failure? Is it closure of the collector channels, or is it some other reason like fibrosis over that region? We just do not know. And where should we incise? If we understand that the JCT is the site of maximum resistance, why are we leaving or incising most of our incisions at the junction of your anterior and posterior trabecular meshwork? Because if we understand the junction of the anterior and posterior TM is where the stem cell niche is presumed to be. So by incising there, you're actually causing inflammation there and you're leaving the juxtacanalicular tissue. You are only excising part or incising only part of the corneoscleral meshwork while the GXT is still there. So these are things that we have to really matter, whether if you make an anterior incision close to the Schwalbe's line, remove the JXT also, does it really matter as far as the IOP control is concerned? These are points to ponder. As far as the anatomy is concerned, we would like to go into the second session.